Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my Siege Ballista Dexterity-Stacker Inquisitor. As the Sentinel League is nearing its end, I wanted to make a build that could easily finish my challenges, as well as just having some fun with tiered runs fueled by the new Uber bosses. In the end, I settled for one of the most ridiculous bossers currently in the game, and definitely the best bosser I've ever played, scaling 20 plus ballistas with Iron Commander, while stacking as much dexterity as I can. 3.18 also brought recombinators, which gave us the new boot damage mods, which basically doubled this build's damage compared to last league. Other than that, our goal is to scale as much dexterity as possible. In our case, we got to 3,242. The build is quite a glass cannon, but when nothing really survives even for a second, you gotta ask yourself if it really matters. We're also using the Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh jewels to give us Ritual of Awakening, allowing us to get all the Inquisitor goodies while still getting the one node you went Hierophant for in the first place. Overall, this build is incredibly fun to play and just kinda silly, and it's definitely worth of being my last build of the league. With that being said, let's get into the build portion of the video. Alright, so before we get into the spicy stuff like the item setup or the skill gems, I want to quickly talk about Siege Ballista itself and also why we're dex stacking. I also want to quickly talk about what this build is made for. So this build excels at bossing, meaning you have okay movement speed, okay clear speed, but at the end of the day, it's really all about your single target damage and your abilities to survive spells, which means that stuff like armor and evasion just doesn't really cut it. Now, if you're in a mapping scenario, you would really like to have armor and evasion, so if you want to make it into more of an all-rounder, you can, but I went all in on what you want for a bosser, and that is basically 100% spell suppression and otherwise just HP. We also have really good recovery. But overall, I would say if you're looking for an all-rounder, you can definitely build this into a rounder. You will have to put in some armor or evasion in the aura department though, sacrifice some of the damage, which is overkill anyways. If you want a mapper, I would definitely look elsewhere. There's just better alternatives. And if you're looking for a bosser, you've came to the right place. Also, I live stream over on twitch.tv/Palsteron. So if you want a bunch of like-minded people, if you just want a place to hang out or ask me questions or just chill with us, then you can do that there. Well, let's quickly talk about Siege Ballista itself and why we went for Dex-Stacking. So I kind of baited you because when it comes to these skill gem segments, this is probably the most cookie cutter skill that you could think about. So basically, when you think about ballistas, you think about a totem you put down, it shoots arrows. There is really not much more to this. You can also support it with barrage support so that additional projectiles will actually scale your single target. And against packs, you will just replace that so your arrows actually spread out. But just to answer this question, people asking me why I'm running Siege Ballista, the only reason is Iron Commander. Iron Commander makes this build worthwhile. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff you can do with Dexterity Stacking, but this is the craziest one because this bow has Siege Ballista has +1 maximum number of summon totems per 200 dexterity, which means that with 3,200 dexterity, we get an additional 16 maximum totems. And as you can see here, that goes out to a total of 22 ballistas you can have up at the same time. I guess something interesting about Siege Ballista is that it naturally pierces up to 10 enemies, so you never need anything like chain or fork ever. It's basically done. But something I want to talk about is the dexterity scaling in general. So when it comes to any sort of end game builds that actually scale off of certain stats like dexterity, strength, intelligence, accuracy, auras, it's always really hard to actually visualize how much you get for that attribute, right? So for example, here we have dexterity scaling, and I just wrote everything down that you get for dexterity. These are the most important thing to have on your build. And if you don't have these kind of building blocks of your build, you can scale as much dexterity as you want. It doesn't really do anything. Dexterity as a baseline gives you accuracy and evasion, and not even that because we're using Magebane, right? So you don't even get any evasion from your dexterity. So how can you get the stats? Well, number one, we already talked about the bow. The bow gives you 1 ballista per 200 dexterity. It also gives you 1 to 3 physical damage per 25 dexterity. Now, you shouldn't really think about this physical part too much because we're going to get most of our flat damage elsewhere from our quiver and boots. We're going to get to that in a second. This physical damage is nice. If you can get it in, you definitely want a little bit of physical converted to cold. It can be nice. But in terms of numerical, like this is only per 25 dexterity, and it's actually lower than, for example, the boots mod that is per 10 dexterity. So this mod is very much low priority. You shouldn't really think about your physical scaling at all. But basically the bread and butter of the build is this 1 ballista per 200 dexterity. Moving on, we have the new kid on the block, the boots mod, and this gives you 2 to 4 cold damage per 10 dexterity, which is absolutely insane. You should not run this build without this mod. If you don't have this mod, you will half your damage straight up. Just this one line on your boots right here. You can get this from Recombinators. So as you can already see, this gives you a lot more flat damage than the bow ever could. The bow is basically just there as a stat stick to give you extra ballistas. Talking about the quiver, it does also a lot of flat damage. In this case, 1 to 2 cold damage per 10 dexterity, and that is this here. Now, one additional good thing is you also get a little bit of cold damage, a little bit of fire damage for your other attributes, which also adds up a little bit, especially because we're Inquisitor and we're also scaling a little bit of strength and intelligence. Then you have the mod on our body armor, which is 1% attack speed per 25 dexterity. This actually gives you attack speed, which we don't really see here. We see cold damage, a lot of increased damage, but attack speed, that's rough to get, but we get it on the chest here. Now, 2 things happened this league that made this build a lot more better than strength stacking. As you can remember here, I did a shrapnel ballista back in, I think, was it last patch? Was it patch before? I don't remember. I think it was last patch. Basically, number one, obviously the boots mod did not exist for dexterity. And now on top of that, Recombinators make it possible to actually get a good chest with attack speed per 25 dexterity. It wasn't really possible before. You only get this mod on grasping males, but now that you can recombinate it on whatever you want, in this case of VAR Regalia, you get dexterity, you get all the defensive mods. That was a huge buff for the build as well. Then we have the helmet, which does a lot of things for us, but one of them is 1% increased elemental damage per 10 dexterity. As you can see here, it also gives us percentage dexterity, all the good stuff. We also get increased damage from our amulet down here. Obviously, you should also be looking at getting as much dexterity as possible, but this mod here is huge if you're looking for a rare one. Then we also have the mastery. So there is a mastery down here for the projectile. That is 1% increased projectile damage per 16 dexterity, also a thing. After that, we have glove mod. Now, glove mod, you can go either way. Basically, I went for the, while a unique enemy is in your present, you get 5% increased damage per 100 dexterity. And then obviously at the end, you also have Mage Bane. Basically, this is a keystone that you can think about it like you press it and you get 100% chance to suppress spell damage. Now, this all together basically forms the core of the build. All right, so next up, I'm going to show you a Uber Cortex to kind of give you a little bit of a sense of the playstyle of this build. In this segment, I'm basically going to show you what you have to do with this build other than just popping down your ballistas. So let's get in here real quick. Now, I have to put this back on. Let's just kill a few mobs real quickly so I can explain some stuff. So the way this build works is, as you can see here, you have a ton of ballistas, but there's obviously more to it. There's some secondary skills. Number one, I actually have Steel Skin on my left click. I already talked about this. This is a boss where you don't really need any defenses, but it kind of made sense because we had slots open. I actually don't know where it is. Is it here? Yeah, Anomalous Steel Skin. And also, if you're bossing, if you're doing Shaper or Cortex Feared at all, there's still going to be trash before the boss is there, and you don't want to just randomly get one shot before you're there. So that's why Steel Skin is pretty nice. I have this one on my left click because I don't really have the gem sockets for cost and damage taken. Now, the most important thing is your 2 auras, Purity of Elements and Summon Skitterbots. Both are just very, very nice. Purity of Elements gives you extra resistances. Makes it so you can't get frozen, stuff like that, and Skitterbots is just more damage. We also have a Hatred Aura. The nice thing about this build is, since you get so much regen, if you look at this, when we have 22 down, I press Hatred, I'm immediately back up to full. Basically, this is on Life Tap and Divine Blessing. As long as it's up, we just get Hatred for free, quote unquote. We also have a Lightning Golem, which isn't really up all that much. I didn't really know what else to do with it. This build really doesn't need much. We also have our Frenzy, which we're going to shoot against bosses. When you're in a map, you really don't need it. You have way too much damage anyways. I also have a Stormbrand theoretically here, which I never really put down. There's never a scenario where it even buys me like 0.1 seconds or something. This is basically just there to give me the Culling Strike. That's basically it. But in reality, I never really use it. Now, that is because I put a lot of currency into this build. I have a lot of damage. The lower you go with your damage, the more important these secondary skills obviously get. But let's just quickly run through this. We can maybe look at some of these. Actually, let's just run through. I'm going to look at it after recording so we don't take too long with this. Also, let's maybe make some sound right here. sound, boom, like this. All right, I think we're good. All right, I think we're doing okay. Maybe a little bit silent. Okay, so you can die here if you're a little bit too sloppy, right? Because you don't have any armor, you don't have any evasion. But basically, you just go through, you place ballistas. It's obviously not the craziest playstyle, but as you can see, you have so many arrows that it's still not that bad. You just press your flasks, right? Divine Orb, whatever. Let's just run through. So this is basically how you would run your maps. You don't really have to press anything. You can press Hatred every 8 seconds if you want to. Other than that, you're not really going to frenzy much. But yeah, I guess that's a playstyle thing. You always have your steel skin up because it's on left mouse. And now it's real quickly show you this. Now, while we're mapping, we have hyperthermia in, and against bosses, we put in barrage support. So we get the extra single target damage. And now we are going to put on all our totems. We press Hatred, and we're basically going to just attack with Frenzy, which has our sniper's mark on, which is going to give us single target damage, as you can see here. Absolutely deleted immediately. I don't know what mods this has, but yeah, 140% monster life. So much for that, right? Put this, and yeah, that's basically what you do. Let's quickly wait for the thing in between. What you have to realize, obviously, is I have a lot of Exalteds invested in this. If you're watching this next league already, just understand that it's like almost month 3 of the league already. So yeah, this build is very, very expensive. There's a lot of more budgety versions out there. I'm also going to talk about some alternatives, but overall, as you can see here, even if I had a 1/5 of my damage, I would still be doing just fine. Now let's just do this real quick. Let's hope we drop maybe a Bottled Faith or something. Once again, you put down your ballistas. You kind of want to time it correctly. You press your Hatred, you press your Frenzy, so you get the sniper's mark on it, then you can just screw off. So basically, when you have a build like this that is very squishy, you don't want to stand in the middle. There's also no real reason to do that, because your ballista build, you are kind of ranged, right? So just do this, and yeah, we're done. All right, so next up, let's talk about Ascendancy. The number one question I get is, why am I an Inquisitor? Basically, everybody is Hierophant. This is something I already touched on my first video whenever I made this build for the first time. I went on PoE Ninja and I was kind of just like baffled that everybody is Hierophant. Nobody went Inquisitor. And I'm going to tell you why Inquisitor is straight up better. There's one caveat, and that one caveat is you have to have this Forbidden Flame and this Forbidden Flesh. These basically give you Ritual of Awakening. So when you look at Hierophant, it has really one insane notable. Like, this here is better than anything else, right? It's even better than all these 4 points combined, right? But you can get it with a Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh. And if you remove this from the equation, if you look at Conviction of Power, Pursuit of Faith, it's really just quality of life. And one bigger problem with Hierophant is that you don't really get anything for the last Ascendancy. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, Conviction of Power, pretty meh, and then at the end you get basically nothing. Divine Guidance doesn't do anything, Arcane Blessing doesn't do anything. So you get basically all the upside of Inquisitors, which is just an absolute insane Ascendancy right now. You get Inevitable Judgment. Basically, this makes it so enemies don't have resistances, which is insane. Righteous Providence gives you straight up like 300% increased crit. You have Sanctuary, which gives you more damage. You have Pious Path, which scales this more damage. And what Pious Path also does is all the regen you get from Ritual of Awakening now also counts for your energy shield. And since we get the Ritual of Awakening here, 1% of life regen per second for each summoned totem. We have 22 totems. That means that our 22% life regen now also counts for energy shield. So when it comes to defenses on a bosser, there's not that many important ones. Evasion, pretty meh. Armor, pretty meh. Spell suppression, spell block, insanely strong, right? We do have 100% spell suppression, but recovery is very nice. And you're especially going to see that if you do stuff like Uber Cyrus, or Uber Elder. But the two things we're missing from Hierophant, if we're Inquisitor, that we have to work against, is number one, the totem placement speed. And we're going to talk all about that in the gearing section. We have this one covered completely. I have a very, very good totem placement time right here. And as well as that, you have to kind of circumvent the mana. Mana for me is no problem. We simply solve this by getting 3 times the skills have minus to mana cost on our jewelry. So TLDR with Inquisitor, you get the best of both worlds. You get the whole Inquisitor stuff. Like, everybody's playing Inquisitor right now. I don't think I really have to talk too much about it, while also getting the best Ascendancy notable in Ritual of Awakening from Hierophant. That being said, as we know, Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh, that's something that price fixers love. So if you can't get your hand on one of those, the good thing about this build is you can always go Hierophant and respec Inquisitor later. There's the same starting point. They're both Templars. So yeah, it's basically just a progression in terms of currency. And also something you will notice is that since we now have Pious Path and we get the region also on Energy Shield, all our bases are Energy Shield, or as much as possible. I have this on a Val Regalia, which it originally is not, so I actually recombinated this one from a Grasping Mail to Val Regalia. That gives me a ton of Energy Shield, as well as that I have the 10% of maximum life as maximum Energy Shield. I have Sorcerer Gloves, I have Sorcerer Boots. You might think those are not that big of a deal, but they really are. They will make the difference whether you have like 700 Energy Shield or 2,100, which can help in getting one shot. As you saw, though, in Cortex and stuff like that, it doesn't really matter. You don't really get hit, but there is fights where you're just going to get hit and you can't just like fall over if you're doing Uber Elder or Uber Cyrus. Next up, let's talk about items, starting with the reason this build exists, which is Iron Commander. So one thing I always see people doing wrong is double corrupting these for some reason. What you have to understand is if you double corrupt an item, the implicit vanishes. So in this case, that means you lose 50% crit. And that's not global crit, that is base crit. So up top here, you have 7.5% base crit, which for a bow is very adequate, which would go down to 5% if you straight up remove this implicit. So even if you hit the GG plus 1 arrow and onslaught or whatever, it's still garbage. You should never double corrupt this. All you have to do is get 20% attack speed, 20% placement speed if you can. You get a Harvest enchant on there for the attack speed per 8 quality. You have to get at least 24% quality. Then you get 3 attack speed right there. You're done, right? That's all you have to do. Iron Commander, yeah, pretty straightforward. Don't corrupt, don't do anything fancy. Then we have our Helmet, Fractal Thoughts, which is absolutely huge for the Helm enchant. So we talked about Inquisitor and having a problem with placement speed because we lose 140% placement speed from not being Hierophant, right? So you have to get that back. And one of those ways is you get it on your helmet. Siege Ballista has 45% totem placement speed. Now, if you want to get even more fancy, you can also get the Socketed Skills, get a 90% cost reservation multiplier. At the end of the day, not much is gonna happen if you don't have that. I think the only change is that you can get an extra Bone Chill in there. We're going to talk about it in the skill gem section. But yeah, this helmet is huge. There's nothing better out there. Don't even look for it. Pretty easy to get this one. Then let's talk about chests. If you want to know how I made some of these, definitely check out the videos I made before this build guide leading up to it. One of those was this Val Regalia right here. This costed me quite a bit. Something you have to understand is this build can be complete glass cannon. You can completely ignore life and stuff like that. But I didn't want to make it that glass cannon. I still wanted to be able to do Uber Elder very easily because I'm not that great at bossing. I'm going to be honest, right? I'm going to get hit sometimes. Now, you need the attack speed per 25 dexterity. You really want dexterity on top. As much energy shield as you can get. Like I said, if you can't get this on the Val Regalia, fair enough. But you should definitely try to if you have the capital for it. The enchantment is also quite important. If you get 30 quality on there and you get the Harvest enchant, plus 1 dexterity per 2 quality, that's 15 dexterity right there. And also very important, if you're going for Inquisitor, gain 10% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. Absolutely huge. So we have this chest right here. Boots, absurdly important for the 2 to 4 cold damage to attacks per 10 dexterity. Nothing else matters on your boots before you have that. Everything else is dog shit. That is the #1 priority you should have. After that, dexterity is huge. Now, I crafted 2 of my thingies here. Are my gloves still in here? Yeah. So both gloves and boots I crafted with hollow fossils. Now, hollow fossils basically make it so you get an abyss socket. Abyss sockets are, as always, just for these abyss jewels, but you do trade off a gem socket for it. So if you have some other fancy setup, just be mindful of that. The reason you want abyss sockets is because you can get up to 26 dexterity once again. So you can get a dexterity suffix and on top of that abyssal socket, which gives you even more dexterity. But yeah, also in terms of implicits, I went for these while a unique enemy is in your presence, right? So hatred is insane. Getting your hatred buffed, getting your auras in general buff, that's a really good damage increase. The reason I went for those, for this style of implicit is we're a bosser, right? So if you want to make this more of an all-rounder, then go for the straight up ones. The difference is basically, if you just have Hatred Aura effect, it goes, for example, up to 30% here. The same tier would be 30%, as is 42% here. So basically, you have the trade-off where it's not always up, but against the enemies where it matters, it's up. So I would go for this one. Also, for Boot Implicit, just know that action speed does not increase the attack speed of your totems. Action speed only affects you. It does not affect brands or totems. It just is what it is. Now, one thing you can also get on boots is placement speed. The 40% placement speed you see right here, I got from a Veiled Chaos Orb, or you just craft it on, the craft is up to 30%. As for gloves, nothing really special here. We have the dexterity, we have it on Sorcerer gloves, we get the attack speed, we get the Abyssal Socket, we got the 35% of physical damage converted to cold damage, which is not crazy good, but it's decent. There's not really anything better. We got that with a Veiled Chaos Orb as well. Now, in the implicit, you want the Intimidate, which is very nice, and you want the damage per 100 dexterity. As for Quiver, I don't think anything beats Harry's Demise. At least I haven't seen anything yet. Getting the 1 to 2 cold damage per 10 dexterity, absolutely huge. We already talked about it in the mechanic section. You also get 30 all attributes. Now, one thing a lot of people do wrong with this is the roll of all attributes can actually get quite low. So it's 15 to 30. You got to realize those stats matter quite a bit. You have a lot of increased dexterity. So for example, if you would be missing 10 dexterity here, that's not just missing 10 dexterity, that's missing 20 dexterity, because you have like so much increased dexterity from other sources. So even if you have had good corruption, if this is on like 17 all attributes and you lose like 13 all attributes, that's a big deal, so also look out for that. As for corruptions, if you're fancy like me, the #1 corruption is Bow's Fired Additional Arrow. You don't need Chain because you're piercing already. It doesn't do anything. Number 2 would be either Point Blank or cold damage to attacks. Cold damage to attacks is very strong. The only thing Point Blank does is it saves you a point, which is actually better than you might think, because points in this build means you get more points for your cluster jewels. Then we have jewelry. The #1 important thing on jewelry is that you get 7%. It's actually 6%, but with the quality attribute, it goes up to 7% increased dexterity. Synthesis rings. Now, if you can get something on top, like here, I got a global critical strike multiplier, which is very strong. On this one, I got strength, which doesn't do anything for me. It used to, but not anymore. So the way I made these ones is basically with essences. I went for, I think it was Scorn. Yeah. So basically you spam essences of Scorn until you hit tier 1 dexterity, and then you get a third suffix with, for example, suffixes cannot be changed, Reforge Chaos, like I did here, I hit T2 Chaos resistance, or here I did Reforge Cold, I got the cold resistance. That's how you do it. And then the prefix, what I did is I did suffixes cannot be changed and Veiled Chaos Orb. Then you can get this life and regenerate mana per second hybrid, which is nice if you don't have all the minus mana cost, but it wasn't really needed in the end. So obviously, if you have the money, you can also reforge life until you get tier 1 life, which would be even better, but I didn't really see the necessity for it. We're looking pretty fine as is. Now, something you have to be careful of, and that's why I have -6 mana cost here, is that you actually don't go to 0 mana. Because if you're on 0 mana, then your inspiration does not work. So this only gives you the more damage if you're actually spending mana, so just make sure of that. For me, it was a weird situation, because while I have Barrage in, I was paying mana, but then somebody told me, wait, while you have Hypothermia in, you don't get the buff at all. So yeah, you have to play a little bit around with that. Next up, we have the Amulet. There's a lot of alternatives for amulets. The cheapest one would be an Astramentis. Then you can also get an Eyes of the Great Wolf. The GG Eyes of the Great Wolf would be percentage attributes and percentage crit multiplier. Those are crazy and actually very close to these. Getting this one already almost impossible. One thing I want to mention, the reason I have this Anoint Measured Fury is because I have a Timeless Jewel here, and Measured Fury gives me 5% increased dexterity. Now, when it comes to belt, you have really 2 options. Option number 1 would be a Mageblood. If you go Mageblood, you have to rearrange some of your flasks, because we have a lot of unique ones for the extra damage. But if you don't want to go Mageblood, then definitely go for a heavy belt like this. Percentage increased dexterity in the implicit. If you can get dexterity on top, if you can get other good mods, that is huge. And then what you just do is you spam dexterity essences until you get stuff like resistances, maybe even strength. Strength can be good as well, because strength can be directly transformed into critical strike chance here, right? So stuff like that. You also get the life in the prefix. We only have a veiled life mod right here. It can obviously go up way higher. We also got some energy shield. So yeah, nothing special here. Now, as for jewels, the number one important thing you have to realize is that you can actually farm harvest implicits for every single one of your jewel that isn't corrupted and get 6% placement speed per. The chance to get that implicit is 1 in 26, which might sound scary, but you can actually target farm these with these compasses right here. So plants harvested are more likely to give less common options, and harvesting your maps contain at least one crop of yellow plants. You want the yellow plants. These are the implicits. You can also buy these on TFT, but you will see it's really annoying to message so many people. Nobody really has many of them. You can just slam these on, run some maps, harvest this on the map device, right? So you can 100% force it. So if you have the currency to spend, definitely do so. If you do not have this, you're literally going to lose like 40% placement speed. It really adds up quickly. If you don't have these jewels, you cannot go Inquisitor, because this node is too important. You just go Hierophant. You can respec later whenever you get these jewels, but these are basically what make this build tick. We have Interrogation, which basically fixes our crit. Brittle is just an absolute powerhouse right now. One thing I want to mention is I actually wanted to go for Brittle Ground Boots first. You can get that in the implicit, but the problem is it was just really annoying having to like walk over enemies so that Brittle Ground actually sticks, and then they move and then they're not on the brittle ground anymore. So overall, just go with Secrets of Suffering. I know it costs you a jewel slot, which is huge on attribute stackers, but trust me. Now then we have Brutal Restraint. Now for Brutal Restraint, this is a little bit more complex, but there's two positions where you can put it in. You can path like this here, so you can path through here, and you can have a Brutal Restraint from here. Just take these 1-pointers or these 2-pointers, whatever you want. Or, which is, in my opinion, the more flexible slot is this one right here. So the Brutal Restraint that I have currently is 20% Dexterity. So I have Dexterity here, Dexterity there, here, and also here. On top of that, I get plus 20 Dexterity here, and also the 20 Cold Res from a Golem's Blood. If you don't know yet, these jewels are actually solved now. You can actually have a tool that gives you the perfect like jewels. I will say that this late in the league, you're probably not going to get a good one anyways. I would probably just Divine still. You don't need a Keystone, so that makes it a lot easier. You buy one, a Divine costs like 9 Chaos right now. I would just divide them as we speak. Also, I'm not going to give you any numbers here that are good for this build. There's a few one out there. You can grab them yourself, because the problem is if I do so, I just enable flippers. I don't know how to do this, but if I tell people what to do, then flippers are going to buy it up anyways. If I say find it out for yourself, maybe now you're pissed because I don't give it to you. I don't know. Just find it out yourself. I don't want any problem with that. Now, Rain of Splinters, pretty straightforward. You get 2 additional projectiles. This is a pretty easy way to get Corrupted Blood as well. Just saying. Fluid Motion, this is basically for up here to convert all of these travel nodes that are usually strength to dexterity. Then we have the Abyss Jewel. So Emperor's Mastery is completely unnecessary. I paid like 100 exalts for this. There is no reason to. There's absolutely no reason to. Save your exalts for anything else and just get an Emperor's Cunning. There is no reason other than that it looks shiny, I guess. Then we have an Unnatural Instinct, which is pretty whatever. I have it up here. It gives me a little bit of move speed. It basically solves my resistance issues. It gives me those 2 small totem nodes here. You lose 10 dex here, 10 strength here, but you get them back with these small nodes. Overall, it's not great for the price, but it is whatever. It's a pretty easy jewel to get. Now, Watcher's Eye. There's no real important one on the Watcher's Eye. There's actually nothing you need. The Hatred crit Watcher's Eye actually doesn't do anything because you already have Brittle, which is going to solve all your crit issues. Now, converted to cold damage is actually the most damage you can get. Chaos Res, while affected by Purity of Elements, this just makes it so it's a little bit more comfortable on ground effects and against dots. There's a lot of random poison when you're doing Adziri or, for example, Cortex. But yeah, Watcher's Eye, really not that big of a deal in this build. You can also skip it altogether because guess what? Watcher's Eye does not have Dexterity, so it's actually not that crazy in this build. And at the end of the day, we also have our 2 split personalities, which are down here. You definitely, so one thing you wanna manage is your helmet. So your helmet gives you percentage dexterity if strength is higher than intelligence. So your strength has to be higher than your intelligence. You have to fiddle around with this. You definitely want dexterity, obviously, on your split personality, but whether you want intelligence, whether you want strength, that depends on you. So for example, I'm pretty sure I have this one here, this one here. This way, actually, was it like this? No, it was like this. like this, easy combo. You have more strength than intelligence. Everything's fine. As for Flasks, if you have a Mageblood version, that obviously looks completely different, but we're actually utilizing 3 unique Flasks. Now, we have a Bottled Faith, which is huge. If you did not know, Inquisitor's increased effect of Consecrated Ground actually scales Bottled Faiths more damage while enemies are on Consecrated Ground, so that's really nice. In general, Bottled Faith will just cap out your crit. It's huge. It gives you even a little bit more regen. Aziri's Promise gives you a little bit more damage. The Leech doesn't do anything. It's basically just there because you want Chaos Res anyways, and the little bit of damage is nice to have, right? Quicksilver Flask, if you want a real experience, obviously, a real bossing experience, obviously you can cut this. I didn't really see any reason to. Most bosses still want you to be agile, and a lot of the times those bosses also have like a map to traverse before, so there's no real reason not to go for one. I go for a Silver Flask on here instead of a medium Cluster Jewel to get the totem, to get the Onslaught whenever you place a totem, just because I didn't really see a reason to. Our passive tree is extremely cramped. It's almost impossible to get anything in. We would have to cut one of these Cluster Jewels, and if you want to know how painful that would be, please look on POB. It is absolutely crazy how good these are. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But basically every passive point is huge. So we get Silver Flask from here. That means it's also always up, not only when we put down a totem. Also, this has a suffix with attack speed, which is cute. And at the end, we have Dying Sun. This is nice for clear, but once we have Barrage support in, this actually gives us the extra true projectiles. One thing I will say is you can definitely go for increased effect on these flasks to make it even better for bossing. Overall, I felt like, since they're, for example, in Cortex or Uber Ziri, you have to traverse a map before, it felt a little bit annoying and kind of useless. But if you are on less of a budget, getting the most out of your flask, getting most damage out of your flask is quite important. All right, next up for gem setup. Number 1, Anomalous Siege Ballista is the best version of Siege Ballista. You get 2 additional projectiles for a little bit of reduced attack speed, but you get so much attack speed from this chest and the cluster jewels that we're going to talk about in the passive tree. That is not a big deal. Divergent Inspiration, if you can get a Divergent one, that is huge for mana issues. Absolutely huge. Make sure that you have at least 1 mana cost on your skill at all times, so this actually procs. Damage on full life, we're very region based. We have a lot of region, so we're basically always on full life. There's not really much more to do here. It's just a decent one, right? Increased critical damage. This build is very starved for crit damage because most of your suffixes are already done and you don't have much opportunity to invest into it on the passive tree. Elemental damage with attack skill is huge. Understand that this elemental damage cannot be reflected, also counts for your totems, so you don't have to reroll reflect at all. And then for our gem swap, this is Hyperthermia and Barrage. Barrage is for single targets. Hyperthermia is for clear. Just so you're clear on this, yes, we do have the Brittle Jewel here, which says you cannot inflict chill, but we do have Skitter bots, which can still inflict chill right here, because they're not you. Now, the second 6 link is a little bit underutilized. I didn't really know what to do with it because our main skill is our single target and our clear, right? So we have the Sniper's Mark set up with Divergent Mark on hit. You can also go cast on crit. It was a little bit too inconsistent for me, but then you wouldn't get the reduced effect of marks, which is nice. I pair that with Frenzy to get Frenzy charges for free, basically. I also have Anomalous Summon Lightning Golem. The Anomalous just gives you extra buff effect, and then also Anomalous Flame Dash, which gives you more travel distance, so you can be a little bit faster. Now, the thing we have in here, supported with all of these active skill gems, is an Awakened Enhance. Obviously, Enhance level 4 doesn't really change that much. I had the monies, so why not? That just gives a little bit of bonuses to all of these skill gems. Overall, not that great use of a 6 link. If you have a better idea, go for it. As for auras, very important, Purity of Elements. It doesn't just make you immune to elemental ailments. The all resistance is insane in this build. One of the problems with attribute stackers is attributes are suffixes and so are resistances, right? So we have to get them somewhere. We might have to sacrifice stuff somewhere. We probably would not be able to get crit multi on both our rings, for example, if we didn't have this. So overall, Purity of Elements, just an absolute all-star. Also not having to worry about a big ignite here, getting shocked there, getting frozen, all of that stuff. Really cool. And then we have Skitter bots just for the more damage from the shock, and also being able to chill for Hypothermia, even though we practically shouldn't, and you can support this with Awakened Unbound Ailments and Divergent Bone Chill to give you even more damage increase. Then we have our Divine Blessing setup, which is Hatred, Divine Blessing, Life Tap. You can definitely get an increased duration in there. I think as is, we have like 10 second on the Hatred or something. If you get an increased duration in there, that would be 18. So you don't have to press it that often. What I've run across is basically I press it and everything is dead immediately. So the increased duration was kind of useless. As always, Divine Blessing, Life Tap. As I already said, since we have so much regen, it's actually really nice that your life will come back up immediately. Then we have a Stormbrand with Culling Strike. That's basically all it does, which is kind of like a more multiplier. But I will say that I never even get to cast it, right? I don't even see if it does anything, but that can change. The lower investment you have, the more important these kind of things are. Also Steel Skin, which is just going to be on a left click so we don't die to trash all that much. Next up, let's go over the passive tree. There's a lot of unique jewels here. We're going to go over some of them that need a little bit more context, but mostly already did this in the jewel section. Definitely check out the timestamps. Number one, we're going to go out of here, and all the strength we're going to path through is going to be converted with the fluid motion right here. The big thing about the passive tree here is we're using 3 large cluster jewels. And this is the best way to scale these kind of dexterity stackers. I have looked through a lot of these on Pure Ninja, and I've looked at the whole cold to the core blanketed snow setups where you have these 8 passive cluster jewels. It has no chance to beat this. So if you want the best version, you have to get jewels like this. Now these are a little bit annoying to make. I have a video out where I talk about how to make these a little bit more, not too in depth, but basically I give you a little bit of guidelines. But basically if you can get these, it will get your build to the next level. Don't forget that you want your split personalities up here. What else is there to say? Basically, we definitely want to grab this mastery, increase projectile damage per 16 dexterity. Really important. Also, whenever you can get that crit multi in, crit multi is definitely something that we are severely lacking. You don't have to take Cloth and Chain. The reason I took Cloth and Chain is simply that it gives me some all-res, which we needed, and it also gave me 5% dex. So I would not have gone for this if it wasn't for the 5% dex. As with Brutal Restraint, I already talked about this. It's a little bit complicated. Anything else? Yeah, you definitely should be taking Mageblood. Magebane, always do that. Getting that 100% spell suppression is absolutely huge for a bosser. Other than that, so basically when it comes to these jewels, something I want to point out is you always want 35% increased effect, 8 dexterity, and then on top of that, there's some mods that you can think about. So there's, for example, attack speed. This 3% attack speed gets converted to 4, as you can see here. You can also get all attributes like I have down here. So this 4 all attributes gets converted to 5 because of the increased effect. There's some more stuff. You can play around with like strength, intelligence to get a little bit more crit with the Inquisitor, but that's all kind of suboptimal. In the prefix, you can go for energy shield, you can go for life, you can go for increased damage. At the end of the day, the only TLDR I can give you is with these clusters, get as much dexterity and attack speed as you can. Next up, let's quickly talk about cutting costs. Number one thing that you gotta realize is that we talked about dex scaling at the start of the video. These are the bread and butter of your build. So I'll go through item slot by item slot, and I'll tell you what's mandatory. Iron Commander, mandatory, super cheap. Get a good roll, get good attack speed. Fractal Thoughts, mandatory. You really want that Siege Ballista placement speed. Pay somebody on TFT to get that. Maybe farm it yourself. Maybe there's one on the market. I don't know. The cost reservation multiplier is not that important. If you cannot support your mana with it, just go for only skitter bots and maybe not go for these support gems. You will get a little bit less damage, but that is not worth the cost if you're on a budget. Harry's is absolutely mandatory. It's not that expensive. Instead of additional arrow, instead of point blank, just get something like cold damage, for example. Even fire damage is fine, right? Even these other elements, because we are Inquisitor, so we're penetrating all elements, not just cold like the Hierophant version. So far, so easy, right? The uniques are down. As for rings, percentage dexterity rings are absolutely huge. I would definitely go for it. You don't have to go for the expensive craft with the crit multi. You can also just directly go for dexterity essences and just go from there. You don't have to do like meta crafting to get your life. All of those are kind of like on top of everything else. Just make sure that you can handle your mana with all of these slots. As for Amulet, you can get an Eyes of the Great Wolf with percentage attributes, which is very strong. If you can get crit multi on top, that's great. If you can get percentage life, that can help a little bit with squishiness. I don't know. I'm not really too into defenses on a bosser, but whatever, you don't really need it. An amulet like this, you're basically not going to get unless you exactly know how to recombinate stuff and you have the investment to blow, because we got unlucky quite a bit with this, and at the end we got it very late. If worst comes to worst, get an Astramentis. Astramentis is worse than this amulet, obviously, but it's not the end of the world. What you have to understand with this build, and I just want to throw this in here, is we do way too much damage. There's nothing in this game that actually can withstand 1.3 billion damage. I often don't even have time to apply my Sniper's Mark and even get my Frenzy off, and things are just dead. I can't even get my Calling Strike, like Stormbrand, off a lot of the time. So you have a lot of wiggle room there. On your chest, increase attack speed by 25 dexterity. If you can get that and a dexterity roll, huge. Boots, get the 2 to 4 damage per 10 dexterity. Everything else is nice to have on top. Movement speed is huge. Placement speed is huge. Abyssal sockets are the most expensive thing in here, because you can really only craft abyssal sockets if you have fractured mods. Because if you don't have fractured mods, you will have to spam more hollow fossils than there are on the market. They're not that expensive, but there's only so many out there because not that many people are actually delving. So that means you can save a lot of currency by just cutting your 2 abyssal sockets. You will also get 2 extra gems, so maybe you can get creative with that, maybe make something out of it. Last time I checked, the percentage dexterity implicit actually isn't that expensive, so I don't think belt is too much of a problem. Yeah, if you have a Mageblood, you're obviously not under any currency pressure anyways. As for flasks, nothing here is really that important. Even bottled faith is only 2x at this point. As for cluster jewels, a huge cost sink will be these cluster jewels. So basically, the 3 mods you're trying to hit is dexterity, increased effect, and as your 3rd mod, you either want attack speed or all attributes. Those are the most important mods. If you can get those free, good. The rest is just upside. So for example, here on top of that, I have 7 max life, which is very nice. Once again, we're a glass cannon. Is it that important? Yeah, maybe you can tank 1 more Shaper Ball. That's nice to have, right? But is it the end of the world if you don't have it? Not really. Here you get 4% increased damage, which goes up to 5% because of the increased effect. It's okay, but we have so much increased damage per dexterity that you won't even miss it. It's probably like 3% extra damage in total or something. What else can you cut? Brutal Restraint here, just settle earlier, right? Just settle whenever you get 3 times percentage dexterity. That's already really, really good. You don't have to go for these absolute insane ones. Once again, you don't need a keystone, right? So it does not matter. You can just spam divines until you get something decent. Also, I think there was something else. Yeah, Watcher's Eye. You can completely forget about Watcher's Eye. You don't have to spend anything for it, because guess what? I was actually at some point cutting Watcher's Eye completely because there's nothing really crazy here. I would want crit multi, but I don't run anger, so I can't really get it. I could get crit multi precision, but then I have to give up a gem socket, right? The only thing we're really running is pure developments, which gives us like what? Chaos res. And the hatred doesn't give us much because we are already crit capped. We don't need cold penetration because we're an Inquisitor. The flat cold damage doesn't do anything because we already have so much cold damage. So overall, Watcher's Eye is a big currency sink that you probably don't need. It is nice to have the Chaos Res though, I will say that. Split personalities are not very expensive. I think we got it all. Unnatural Instinct, I'm only running because I want this all res and just a little bit more movement speed. Pretty much just fancy on top of everything else. I think we have the Emperor's Mastery somewhere as well, right? I just threw that in there. Once again, Emperor's Mastery, just get Emperor's Cunning instead. Also, if you want to know more about the budget version, Arrow actually has a video out there, so you can also check that out. It's a Hierophant version. I'll link it down in the description as well. As for leveling, I won't go super in depth because it's not a league starter. But what I will say is that leveling bossers is always incredibly annoying, especially in a build like this where every passive point matters. Every passive point is great. Like even now I'm at level 99. If I got this extra passive point, I get another 4% more damage. If I maybe threw around a little bit of my gear, maybe upgraded some things, I could maybe even get to 23 ballista. So stuff like levels just really, really matter. And the problem on a bosser is you don't get much XP because your mapping kind of sucks. Now, what do you do? So basically you can pay for 5 ways. You can pay for your Chayula runs on TFT, all of those good things, which is what we did. We actually paid for 5 ways. But as for leveling up to like level 70, I went for Stormbrand. Obviously, if you already have an Inquisitor at level 98 or something, just respec it. That's gonna save you so much time and so much annoyance. But if you just want to level it from scratch, go Stormbrand. You can also just level with Iron Commander and Hyres once it's like level 36, I think, or something. You can do that. It wasn't that great. It was kind of slow. But I like leveling with the skill I'm going to play just to get a little bit of a feel for it. But if you don't, you can also just level with Stormbrand, coupled with 2 Replica Thessalios, which are incredible. So much cold damage. Just make sure you don't have elemental focus on your Stormbrand so you can actually chill. And other than that, you have all this good stuff, right? Luctonial, 7 League Steps, Replica Karui Ward. I really like Goldrim, Tabula Rasa with +2 levels. You guys know the drill. Also, small tip here, a lot of people forget to actually put the elemental damage quality on Replica Thessalios. Just makes it even more insane. But in conclusion, what did I think about the build? Well, this bosser is absolutely absurd. Probably the best bosser I've ever played. I cannot remember ever playing anything that did as much damage as this. Obviously, this league we had the cast on death build, which was awesome. I love that idea. Basically, I would describe this build as sort of like a cast on death build, but you don't die whenever you cast, which is pretty cool. The damage obviously doesn't go to like 10 billion, or I think MBX even at 20 billion, but you don't really need that. Also, you can do bosses that have phases, which is huge. Cast on Death is very, very limited in what it can do. This build can do every single boss in the game. Now, the mapping is kind of meh, so if you're looking for a great all-rounder, it's okay. I'm not saying it's terrible. But you have projectiles everywhere, right? The build is really, really fun. But overall, if you're looking for a mapper, look elsewhere. But I want to point out this build is just super, super fun. You have projectiles all over the screen. Whenever you put Barrage on for the first time and you have these like absolute barrages of projectiles from like 22 ballistas or like 18 or 16, whatever your budget is, it's just a sight to behold. I think as a content creator, as content creators, we often forget that fun factor, and that is definitely there in this build. To be fair, fun is subjective, but yeah, you know what I mean. It is also better than strength stacking. So I have played the Replica Iron Commander version last league, and the reason I played that before is there wasn't that many tools for dex-stackers. So dex-stackers got this boot mod, whereas the Replica Alberon's version can't use the strength boot mod because Replica Alberon's is boots, so you can't have both, right? So basically what they did is they kind of screwed all the strength stackers, and they gave intelligence and dexterity stackers a lot with this new mod. Like this new mod, it seems so innocent, but it's just a complete game changer. As well as that, recombinators just made it a lot easier to actually get a good chest with increased attack speed per 25 dexterity, which also made a huge difference. So overall, if you ask me, should I go for your old Replica Iron Commander, you should definitely go for this one here, in my humble opinion. Also, this build is a glass cannon. If you don't like that, in my opinion, on softcore, bossers, if you want to make any sort of currency, are not about tanking stuff. They just are not. That's a hardcore thing to do. But in softcore, you can one-shot phases so quick, you're almost never going to die. And if you die here or there, you portal back in. You're not going to brick anything with this build. But it does have great recovery, which came in very clutch against Uber Cyrus, as I already said. Uber Cyrus, Uber Elder. It is huge to get that recovery because you're going to get hit here or there and then just going back up immediately. Absolutely huge. That's definitely something that the Hierophant version cannot. But yeah, I hope you like the build. Definitely also check out the 3 videos leading up to it. They will be linked down in the description. If you want to try out the build, definitely go for it. I don't know what's going to happen to recombinators, so maybe you're not going to get the chance anymore. Because once this mod is gone, I don't know what happens to this build. Once we can't make a good chest with the attack speed per 25 dexterity mod anymore, I don't know what happens to the build. So if you want to play some pew-pew action, this might be the league for it. But overall, I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, what a fun build. We have just been absolutely slicing through these feared sets. We started with 100. We're now, I think, 16 or something. It has been a ton of fun. Can definitely recommend this build if you want to play a completely screwed up bosser. I'm not the biggest fan of bossers usually, but when it comes to ballista builds, you guys know the drill when it comes to me. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.